The very real ability to have worked for him when he was governor of California, where he was starting his political career, and then to see him learn and expand his knowledge and his capabilities as President of the United States was really a great experience. One of the things about him was he was a very disciplined man. He wanted to get information. He wanted to make decisions properly, and so it was an easy way to work for someone because you knew that he was going to back you if you were doing the right thing and following what he had in mind. He also was very clear on what his principles were. You talked about the Founding Fathers and the Constitution. He had deeply read about the Founding Fathers and the history of the Constitution, and that, of course, was his guideline for what he did as president. So it was an opportunity really to see the concepts of the founders brought up to date 2 centuries later and being applied to common problems every day in the United States, as well as in problems of foreign policy.
A man of tremendous wisdom and humanity.
Yes, he was, and of course that's why he was so strong, as I mentioned earlier, on the Taiwan Relations Act, and the main thing was to keep our commitments to other nations. He realized that America had to do 2 things. One, we had to be strong economically, and we were going through some tough things at that time, strong militarily, and strong politically in terms of our relationships with other nations. And the other thing was that we had to be true to the constitutional principles which had been handed down. And those 2 things really guided his presidency, and I think made it one of the most successful presidencies that we had during the entire 20th century.
I think many of you may not know, but let me introduce. General Mills was actually one of the persons, one of the 2 people who heads up the Ronald Reagan campaign for president. So we are very honored for you to be here because we all admire President Reagan very much indeed.
Well, thank you. It was, as I say, a great opportunity, a great privilege to serve him.
General Mills, what was President Reagan's style behind closed doors, especially on foreign policy?
Well, one thing I've got to say about him, he was an easy person to work with because he had such a great sense of humor. And even on the tough issues of foreign policy, he never let us leave a meeting without relieving the tension, often with a joke or something like that. But he had, when I mentioned that he was a disciplined person, he knew that it was necessary to get all the information that he possibly could to make decisions. And therefore, he didn't allow people to come in and grab a hold of him in the Oval Office, for example, and try to persuade him to go this way or that way. He had a regular, disciplined way of dealing with issues, and that was to go through his cabinet so that he could get the advice of sometimes on some issues as many as 18 people from different points of view. On foreign policy issues, he went primarily through the National Security Council, in which there were about 8 of us that met with him, often as frequently as 3 times a week if there were major issues going on. And then he would gather all the information from all of us and our input, and then he would be very decisive and make it clear what his decision was, and then expect us to go out and implement that decision. So there was an orderly way of dealing with some of the most tough problems, which were those of foreign policy. Because at that time, of course, this was the height of the Cold War, in which we had the Soviet Union, as he inherited this from his predecessors, the problems of the Soviet Union. And we saw at that time the economists and others you were talking about who were claiming that capitalism had peaked and it was downhill from there, or that the Soviets were going to be very powerful. They looked at Africa, they looked at Latin America, they looked at Asia, which was moving in that direction. And literally, in the course of one presidency, that was turned around. And the forces were set in motion that led to the implosion of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War. The West won. And I think the idea of democracy and capitalism was proved to be the superior way in which the world was turning. And so I think there's been tremendous change as a result of that period of 8 years that he was president.
Winston, if I can add something, and Jim Kelly was very much involved in this. What President Reagan did, because it was about a year after the passage of the Taiwan Relations Act that he became president, he brought predictability to this bilateral relationship and to kind of cross-straits relations from the American perspective. And because of the good work you did at the NSC, Jim, and Ed Meese as a member of the National Security Council, it was no longer unsettling in terms of what was really going to happen here, because he defined it very carefully and said, this is how America will react. And bringing that kind of predictability to foreign policy and sense of commitment was very, very strong, very important.
That was very true indeed. I can't resist trying to ask General Meese, though, one question that I think I know the answer. Stylistically, meeting with President Reagan in private is really not very different from what he was in public, isn't that so?
No, you're absolutely right. He was the same person if it was just he and me talking in the Oval Office, or if he was talking to 10,000 people giving a speech. He didn't have two faces, one for the public and one in private. And of course, that was a part of his integrity. That was a part of whether it's Mikhail Gorbachev in the Soviet Union or with people in Taiwan, they knew that they could depend on him, that he would not be a two-faced, that he would not have a different personality for those things in private that he would in public.
He wasn't saying different things to different audiences. Right. He was saying the same thing all the time, publicly and privately, to all of those. And this set a path of stability and much more that's so vital.
A great man of integrity. That's why we respect him.
Right.
Yes.
And he studied the issues in detail. And now emerging are all these books about all that Reagan wrote and read. And it's just amazing. At the time, it was thought it was all cue cards. There were some said that. But it's, in fact, this man did immense research on everything he had to handle.
Yeah, he never wanted to let on that this was such a burden, and a lot of the news media said that he didn't work very hard. Well, he really did work hard, but he never tried to make a big fetish out of it and be a martyr or something like that. Rather, he just he used to joke about it, actually, but he did work very, very hard, as Ken said, and that's why he was prepared when he had to make the decisions and why he could be so decisive, because he had really studied and prepared for the job that he had to do.
It was not easy. I hear from you that he was also such a good listener as well.
Yes, he was a very good listener, and that was one of the secrets, I think, too, of his success. He got information from a broad variety of viewpoints, so that he was able then to make a sound decision and stick by it.
More specifically, President Reagan was known as a great friend of Taiwan and Taiwan's democracy, and he did many things to strengthen the relationship. What was his approach to U.S.-Taiwan relations?
Well, actually, it was interesting because after President Nixon had opened up the relationship with mainland China, when Ronald Reagan was still governor of California, President Nixon asked him to go to Taiwan and to reassure the Taiwanese people and the government of Taiwan that the United States was not forsaking them, and that we would work out the relationship along the lines of the Taiwan Relations Act and so on. And so he had a very early relationship, a very early personal knowledge of Taiwan from that experience in the early 70s. And he brought that with him when he was president, of course. And so he had this absolute commitment to the Taiwan Relations Act and to maintaining a strong relationship, not just acknowledging the act, but really a strong relationship and commitment of our country, of the United States, to the people of Taiwan and to its government, to make sure that we would be there to support them and to assist them in every way we could.
Thank you, General Meese. We all admire that you had the opportunity to serve such a great man like Mr. Ronald Reagan.
Thank you.
Secretary Kerry, you had the opportunity to serve under both President Reagan and President Bush, focusing on Asia-specific policies. What was it like serving both men?
And I think we mean that I worked for President George W. Bush So there was a 20-year gap. The fact is, the attitudes of both men towards our relationships in Asia and our relationship with Taiwan is remarkably similar. The greater changes, I think, were in Taiwan as democracy developed and as the economy became more and more strong over those years. I can recall that really before my time in the administration, but President Reagan early on articulated the 6 assurances that really enabled the 1982 communique with the PRC to go forward. Early on in the presidency of George W. Bush, he was asked on television, and his reply, I think, may have been misunderstood, but he said, what would he do if Taiwan was attacked? And as I recall, he said, whatever it takes. So the attitudes were very similar, yet there are complex elements to all of this that both men understood very clearly.